growing avocados. So there's a lot of other talks given about avocados, will primarily be concerned with how to grow them. So it's apparently the most difficult fruit tree to grow, and unfortunately it's that way because the growers who grow them don't grow them in the right dirt. So, you know, dirt is, you know what dirt looks like, it's sand, salt, and clay, and most of the avocados on the retail market are growing in some kind of recycled dead tree. They use wood products, usually it's sawdust, sometimes it's ground up bark, but normally, and what that normally does to plants in general, if they're trying to grow their roots in something that died, especially, you know, the wood product that they use has been decomposing for a while, so it's full of the pathogens that kill plants or rot plants. That's what it's supposed to do. Compost is supposed to rot plants. When you grow an avocado on that, you get rotten roots, and then they'll say, oh, don't water it, don't water it, don't water it. Well, it dries up. The tree has trouble growing because it's now too dry. It's not rotting anymore, but it's bone dry, and you can't get a tree to grow that way. So what we've done is we grow our own trees now. Someone else propagates them for us, but we get them growing. Now avocados, there's three races. This as an introductory, there's three races. Don't know if they're exact species, but there's the ones from Guatemala, the ones that are considered from Mexico, and the ones that are from the West Indies. Now Florida grows primarily the ones in the West Indies. They like that climate better, the super tropical climate, and their fruit tends to be larger, smoother, glossier, but lower oil content. So in Florida they have marketed them as slimcados. But now we know that the oil is better for your health than the sugar. So avocados are very low in sugar, so that they're probably the healthiest fruit you can eat. Views are changing on all this nutrition stuff. So anyway, the original avocados grown in California were, well, they grew a lot of avocados until a real nasty freeze around the turn of the 19th century, and most of them froze to death. I don't know what the temperature was, but it was pretty cold. We know the record around here, for all time record, is 23, but they had a real nasty frost, probably not quite that cold. You know, they first started growing them in Pasadena Altadena area, and they must have gotten a little colder than that, and all of them died except for one tree that was called Fuerte, because it was stronger than the rest, and that is a mostly Mexican variety. So for the first 50 years of commercial avocado production, the Fuerte was our #1 seller. In the 1920s, someone who was grafting Fuerte, or the Haas family was grafting Fuerte trees, but one of the grafts wouldn't take. They let the tree grow, and out came a Haas. So they called it the Haas, not Haas, it's Haas. Brokaw, or grower, says they're Haas's neighbor, or they were Haas's neighbor. It's not Haas, it is Haas. So this came out, and it had a little more thicker peel, easier to extract the flesh from it. Everyone liked it. It was a heavier producer than Fuerte, so they went with this for about 50, 60 years. From the 1950s to now, this has been the most popular variety. Now Haas is getting the competition for Haas now is for its offspring and its mutant forms. So Haas is no longer being sold heavily to commercial orchards, but they're growing a lot of its offspring. So its offspring tend to be heavier producers. So the main problem with Haas and Fuerte, the biggest problem with it, according to our avocado handbook, is that 20% of the trees, and they don't know why, but it's always been 20% of the trees in the orchard do 80% of the production. And the other 80% of the trees just don't produce well. So and because of that, because it's not producing well, it's growing, the trees get huge. So Hass is a much better producer, but you know, compared to other fruit trees, Hass has always been a light producer. So if you have a full-size Hass tree, 15 foot by 15 foot, you're getting an average of 100 fruit a year. Now, if you had an apple tree or a peach tree, it'd be more like 400, 500 pieces. So avocados have always been kind of light producers. So the offspring of Hass have been better producers. But let's talk about pollination, because that's totally misunderstood. So there are two types of avocado blooming patterns, and there's one that's called type A and one that's called type B. So these are the flowers here. They're not real exciting looking flowers. This tree, Edronol, I believe it must be type B. So, well, what type A? Most avocados that we like are type A. And what happens, it's the same flower. One flower is female for 4 or 5 hours in the morning. And in the afternoon, it's male in the afternoon. So the little stamens around the center, avocado flower kind of looks like this, with the female part in the middle and the male stamens with the pollen on the outside. So when in the female stage, these male stamens are stuck to the petals. You don't really notice them much. The female is stuck out here. So that's ready to accept pollen. In the B types, it's female in the afternoon, and the next morning it becomes a male. And I think this Edronol is a type B, yes, because I see the male stamen sticking out right now. So in theory, and this is just a theory, if you have a type B next to a type A, you'll get more cross-pollination. But the research hasn't really supported it very well. So what they notice on all avocado trees is not every branch is synchronous with the others. So a whole branch may be doing the opposite thing, but this instead of female flowers morning, male in the afternoon. And during midday, there's a lot of overlap because they're not all in synchrony. So the research paper we saw put out by University of Riverside, which operates the field station in Irvine, that's where they do most of the avocado, or they have done a lot of the avocado research. They showed that they only did it on, only research I saw paper was they did on Hass. On the Hass variety, because at the time it is the most important variety growing. By far the best pollinator for it was a tree called Zutano. Now most markets won't purchase a Zutano. It's not a very pretty fruit. It's got scars on the bottom end of it. The flavor is not as good as, it doesn't have the highest oil content in the world. So Zutano is kind of a worthless avocado for most, for markets. But the research, so what the researchers said is if you have a block of 9 avocado trees in farm, you've got to make the center one a Zutano to pollinate all those around. It's got to be pretty close. So they know that bees are lazy. They don't really go too far between flowers. Otherwise, they just head back to the hive if they have to go too far. So it's got to be the adjacent tree. So one Zutano can supposedly pollinate 8 other Hass trees. So they did the research and figured out, well, they're increasing production by an average of 11% on all these Hass trees around it. Well, the problem is if you took out the Hass to put in a Zutano, you just took out 12% of your orchard. So now you have to get rid of a bunch of Zutano avocados that you can't sell, and you lost actually 1% of your production. So it's not worth it. If you just had another Hass here, so you know, at your house, they say put an A and a B. Well, if you don't like the B, you could have had 2 A's and had more fruit than if you had an A and one you don't like. And again, Zutano by far was the best pollinator for Hass. There wasn't anything that was close to it. I think Bacon might have been a distant second. So that pollination rule doesn't really help us much. In fact, you know what they concluded was the most important factor for pollination of avocado flowers, 80 degrees. If it's 80 degrees, the bees are out, they'll move the pollen around the single tree, and that's the most important factor. Get the bees out there in warm weather. I remember back in the 80s, I was trying to grow a Pinkerton avocado that bloomed in December. And in the late 80s, it's like 30 degrees at night and 55 in the day, and I didn't see a single bee on that tree at all. It's like, can't grow this tree. Now, you know, it's a lot warmer, or at least a couple years ago, this December was cold too. But we've had warmer December, so we don't really consider that a problem anymore, getting the bees out there in the middle of December. It has happened though. There have been years like 2008, it was just cold. All spring was cold. The avocado trees didn't have much crop on them that year. Now the other thing that the university researchers saw is that, or thought was that bees, it was a problem with the bees. They don't really like the nectar in these flowers. So the kiss of death for an avocado pollination, you know, avocado orchard, be located next to a citrus orchard. The bees like the citrus a whole lot better than the avocados. So anyway, this researcher said, well, I bet you I can do better by hand. So he got his little brush out and started pollinating the flowers by hand, and he got 700 fruit. Instead of 100, he got 700. So he said, yeah, the bees don't like the flowers. They're not hanging around long enough to pollinate. But there's nobody I know who's going to go and do that on an avocado tree, let's do the pollination. So these people on the internet, 2 different people on the internet said, yeah, it's simple. You spray the tree with honey and water, and it suddenly becomes the star flower of your garden. Bees can smell honey from miles away. They'll just come running to your tree. So you can see our tree's got kind of shiny leaves. We sprayed it with honey last Sunday. And now, if this was outside, there'd be bees on it. So the honey helps a lot. You'll get, generally what happens, you get an overcrop. You get more than the tree can support. So, you know, if they said a rare Hass with bees gets about 1 fruit out of every 10,000 flowers. That's really bad. Whereas, you know, citrus is 1 out of 10 flowers to 1 out of 50 flowers. But on avocado, 1 out of every 10,000 flowers, that's pretty poor. So anyway, we sprayed one of our trees about this size with honey last year and got over 100 fruit to set on it, but only, you know, most of them dropped off by the end of summer, and we had a crop of about 20 on a tree this size. Now, just so you know, this tree is only 2 years older than these.
2 years old?
So, if your tree isn't growing that fast, you know, average 3 foot a year, if it's not growing that fast, there's something, you know, it's either growing 3 foot a year or producing fruit. You can't do both very well. But if you're not getting that much growth, there's something wrong with your tree.
What would be wrong?
Bad health. I mean, truthfully, there's not really any good trees on the retail market. There really aren't. We haven't found any retail grower. Now, we get all our trees from Brokaw, spelled the same way as the newscaster. But Brokaw was Hass's neighbor. They've been growing trees for Hass. They are now located not in La Habra where Hass and they were before, but they moved out to Ventura, and they grow about 300,000 trees for orchards every year, larger than these. They're in the next size up, which is pretty much equivalent to a 5-gallon. They call it a 3-gallon sleeve. We don't have them yet. Our crop isn't ready yet. We should get those in about, hopefully in a month or so. They have to wait for the bloom to get over. Usually after the bloom, they have a flush of new growth, and the tree suddenly grows another foot or 2. So they're waiting for that to happen, and then they'll send the trees out to us. So it'll be in a while. But I would tell you, we get faster growth out of these than their larger ones. So anyway, so getting good tree is difficult. Again, all the retail trees are usually grown in some kind of wood product. And again, it's not their fault. The universities told them to do that. They said, you know, you gotta have compost in your soil. Well, in nature, there's no compost in the soil. It's all laying on top of the ground. So instead of doing it properly, where you got all your fungus and bacteria living in the dead leaf litter and the manure and all that on top of the ground, they've stuck that in the dirt with the roots, and it's causing a lot of problems with growing roots. The roots just don't grow too well with that combination. Most retail trees, you plant them, and the leaves get smaller and smaller and smaller and get brown tip. That's a sign of root rot. You got no roots. So, you know, so if you see too much of this and the leaf is kind of yellowish and they're getting smaller and smaller, you don't have a root system. So when I was growing up, I started growing avocado trees back in the 80s, and I'd put one in the ground. You know, I'd put them in 15-gallon size. They're about this big, and the next year they might grow this much, and then they would just sit there, grow a few fruit a year, just wouldn't do anything. And after 5 years, I'd give up on them, pull them out, plant another one, do the same thing for 5 more years, get nothing, pull it out. When we finally found Brokaw, planted one of their trees, grew 3 feet the first. In fact, my first one grew 5 feet the first year. I was going, my God, this is a much better tree. This commercial orchard knows what they're doing. Now there are nurseries that sell to commercial orchards whose trees I don't trust. Brokaw is the one we trust the most. We haven't had as much trouble with their trees as we have with anyone else. So, we know there's a grower down in Vista, or Fallbrook, that grows them in coconut core, which is better than wood, but you know, you put their tree next to Brokaw's and it's orange. It's a orange tint of green. So, and most people say it just sits around for a while. Now, if you've got real good draining soil, the wood product around it or the coconut core around it won't kill it. It may stunt it a little bit, and eventually they'll get going if you've got really good soil. So around here, a lot of the people have sandy soil, especially near the Santa Ana River, sandy soil, and you can buy a retail tree and it won't die, it may not grow as fast, and eventually get going as the wood finally finishes decomposing, that tree gets going. But in most soils, especially the clay soils, you put a tree grown in compost in it and it just sits there and rots. That clay soil doesn't breathe enough to prevent rotting on the roots. Oxygen is the antidote to root rot. Now, you know, they talk about drainage. So site selection, they always say, well, you need really perfect drainage. Well, drainage is a little overrated. If you're not in a pond, you're probably okay. Because I'd be sure that almost every single one of you have seen an avocado pit growing in a glass of water. No drainage in that glass of water. Pure water. We've seen trees in those glasses of water for years. Same glass of water. So it's not the water itself that kills the tree. It's lack of oxygen around the roots. So The problem if water doesn't move for a long time is usually, you know, the roots on plants actually are not making oxygen like the rest of the tree. They're actually consuming oxygen and giving off carbon dioxide just like we do. So all the rest of the plant that's not green is consuming oxygen, releasing carbon dioxide. And if the water can't move and it can't circulate, and the roots are there a long time, they eventually run out of oxygen. And then low oxygen levels promote root rot diseases, root suffocation, and you have your tree going. So if you have a big orchard and there's a part of your orchard that in the winter is just boggy, and it won't dry out, that's where they have those problems. Now in your home, you know, if you just plant one tree, you can always create a non-boggy situation. So even if you have heavy clay soil, and you do that by creating better drainage. But for generally, if this, you know, well, you don't need as good a drainage. You know, they claim for orchards, dig a hole in the ground about a foot deep where you want to plant your tree, fill with water. If it drains in 20 minutes, no problem. I would tell you if it drains in a day, there's no problem. If it just sits there for weeks. I know in my last house I lived at, when it rained, we had a pond that stayed there all the way through spring. So it didn't drain. In fact, my friend who was the geologist to that neighborhood, he says, yeah, we didn't want that soil to drain at all. We were just next to about a 10-foot drop off a hill. And they said, yeah, they learned that if they really compact the soil, put 2 foot of clay, because my front yard was sand. And I was wondering why my backyard was all clay. He says, yeah, within 20 foot of that slope, we just pack it in 2 foot of clay so it cannot drain. But still, I planted an avocado right at the edge of the drop off, and it did. That's the one that grew 5 feet the first year. So it was well drained clay because it was at the edge of a slope. So the hills of Orange County are considered would grow avocado trees. This is our avocado belt. The foothills here, which is sandy clay, it's well drained clay. And that's where you grow an avocado tree. That's the best place to grow an avocado. I mean, right here where the soil is real sandy is great too, but the hills are a little better because they get less fog. So it's warmer. So anyway, if you have, say if you have clay soil, if you raise it up, it drains a lot better. So you can take the clay and raise it a couple feet, and suddenly the drainage is way better because the water wants to be pulled back down to ground level. It's sucked back down by the clay to ground level. So this is all well-drained soil. Now, in my yard, more away from that edge, we wanted to put avocados in there, and we knew we couldn't, my friend said, don't even try to dig that soil, you won't be able to dig it. We tried, we could, jackhammer would work, but we couldn't dig it by hand. So we just piled 2 foot of sandy dirt on top of it. 18 inches. Now what the university is telling the farmers to do is make berms on their farm that are 2 foot high and plant your avocados on that. That's so high. But they said if you make your berms 2 foot high and plant your trees that high off the ground, they won't get, the chance of getting root rot are pretty small. Well, it is, but that's really high. So they showed pictures of avocado orchards where the ground just goes like this. Just hills all throughout. Otherwise, you just plant them on the side of a hill, you're fine. So we did 18 inches high, planted the avocados on top of that hill. And one of the first avocado tree planted that way grew 6 foot in 3 months. We're going, okay, it works pretty good. I had to chop it back because it was getting out of reach already in its first 6 months. So we cut it back down to about 4 feet, let it regrow in more directions. So now to grow these, because this is what we have at the moment, I would not put these in the ground right away. They're too small. you know, someone can just step on one and kill it at this size. So what we recommend everyone do is put it into a 5-gallon bucket for 3 or 4 months till it's about, you know, 3 or 4 feet tall. Then the stem will be about this thick. You can grab by the stem, pull it out. The advantage of black plastic is that this is much warmer than the ground at the moment. You know, ground temperature takes a while in the spring to warm up. Usually it's well warm around May or June. The ground temperature will break 70 degrees. Whereas this is, you know, this could be 90 degrees on a warm sunny day. And that the roots are best and grow their fastest is in the 80-degree range, 80, 85 degrees. So it'll grow much faster in here for a while. You can also move it around, you know, if we get a heat wave all of a sudden, because these are coming straight out of the greenhouse. These can sunburn a little bit. In fact, on the back of this leaf, you can see a little burn mark. But it doesn't seem to bother them that much. I mean, we just potted up 80 of these and put them in on black plastic at our growing ground. A little bit of singeing on, you know, just mild sunburn on a few leaves, but they're fine. We did that the last few years, just set them right out there. In the past, I put them between houses where they get 3 or 4 hours of sun a day and to avoid the sunburn. So avocados like it hot. That year we had, when was it, 4 years ago, we hit 115. Boy, they grew fast that year. And everything grew fast that year. So what we found is that the stems on avocados, so one of the problems we have is that the stems exposed to the sun. Now if you grow an avocado tree from a pit, they will not have exposed branches on them. They grow their leaves so symmetrically, there's no way the sun can ever hit a stem. Because these are grafted from branches of mature trees, they don't grow as a seedling type growth pattern, which is real symmetrical. So we have these branches that the sun can actually burn. If the tree's healthy, they burn at about 108 degrees or higher. That's what we're finding, because when we first got our brokaw trees, we said, they don't burn. I mean, those days, the highest we had hit was 105. And then in 2010 came, we had 110 and 12, and they started burning on us to go, oh, looks like 110 will do it. But, you know, when we carried avocado trees from the other growers, 95 was burning them. The leaves only burn, and it's only the new growth, the very new growth at the tips will burn at about 110 to 112. Because when we hit 115 that year, we lost all the new growth off the top of the trees, but the older leaves had no problem. They can handle that hot. I don't know what the temperature in Guatemala and Mexico, where the avocados come from, how hot it gets there. Of course, they're more humid, so it probably doesn't get quite as extreme as we get on the West Coast, where the air is drier and it can get hotter. But anyway, so they love it. I mean, I guess it was 4 years ago. It was like 100 degrees average during the summer, and boy, the avocado trees grew fast that year. Last year was the coolest summer a lot of people can remember. People in Temecula told me, boy, it was cool this year, nothing grew. And I would have to say the same. Last year, our avocado trees did not grow as well. Like this one was 2 years ago. By the end of the first year, it was about 5 feet. And then it put on a few more feet this year. But last year, our biggest was maybe 4.5 foot. They didn't grow as fast. And with, the meteorologists claim that because Tonga exploded, they think this year overall will be about 2 degrees cooler than normal, which is quite a bit. So that's cool. So we'll see. We'll have to see what happens this summer. Okay, now you can buy a tree from another company, carefully move the dirt, and you might be able to save it. Our luck with that has been not so good. So there's some plant, like when we did citrus, and they were in the wrong soil too. We're in a quarantine zone now, so we can't carry citrus, but when we did carry citrus, they were in the wrong soil. You water it every day, it turns yellow. We would just drop the root ball on the ground, loosen it up, shake it all off, put it in our soil, put it back in the pot, give it 2 weeks of half-day sun, and after that it was fine. We didn't lose a single citrus doing that. Avocados, they always die back after you do that. I've got a few, I've lost maybe 20–30% of the ones, and another half of them just take a long time to recover. So it's not easy to fix an avocado tree that's in the wrong soil. They're kind of sensitive to that. Gardenia is sensitive to that procedure too. They don't like the roots messed with. Probably the fact you're cutting the roots up opens them up to disease, or the trees you're getting in the wrong soil already are sick. So try to start with a good one. These trees are grown with no wood product. This is peat moss and perlite. Peat moss is a dead plant, but it died thousands of years ago, and there is no disease associated with dead peat moss. Whereas ground up wood, ground up bark, that was killed just a few months ago, and there's a lot of diseases associated with that. So peat moss is actually considered a sterile medium, or even an antibiotic, or an antifungal medium. So it's we consider, of the organic materials, one of probably the safest. Well, rice hulls are pretty safe too, but probably the safest one to use because it's been dead so long. So these trees, we put them in our soil, our top pot, which it does have wood in it, but the wood is in the form of charcoal. So charcoal, we like charcoal because it is the material that makes the rich black soils of the world rich and black. Charcoal holds on to minerals like crazy, that's why it's used in filters, and in the soil it makes the soil richer. So it's one form of wood that you can use. Otherwise it's peat moss, but 2/3 of it is quartz, like the ground is quartz. Sand, silt, well, we have sand in here, we've got pumice, which is volcanic silt or quartz, and we also have perlite, which is man-made exploded quartz. So just to make it lighter, otherwise if this was real dirt, this would be about 50–60 pounds of soil. So it's just, now you can grow them in pure sand. If you want to put them in a pot of pure sand, sand was the original potting soil. All the old textbooks written before the 60s will tell you that. We've grown many fruit trees in pure sand. They do quite well. You probably have to leave it in the pot a little bit longer so when you pull it out, the roots will come with the dirt because it'll weigh so much. But other than that, sand is fine. We'll show you how we pot these up in just a moment because there is some technique involved. Irrigation wise, they like a lot of moisture. They're from the tropics and the rainforest areas, so lots of water. Now on avocado trees, roots relatively shallow, they need to breathe air, so generally in soil you won't find them below a foot. So in that case you need to keep the top foot of soil moist, and the only way to determine that, because they don't make meters that are real accurate that are portable. You can get meters that you install in the ground permanently and attach to computers that'll tell you how moist the soil is. But if you just grab a stick, push it in the ground where you're watering, if you can push it in a foot deep by hand, it's wet, a foot deep. If you can't push it in a foot deep by hand, you gotta up your water a little bit, get it down to a foot. Foot of moisture, if the roots are entirely moist, they'll grow. If they think it's too dry, they just sit there and don't do anything. They don't make fruit, they don't, nothing happens properly. So you gotta keep the soil moist to that depth. Too much water doesn't hurt them. If there's no compost in your soil, too much water won't hurt them unless the water just sits there like a pond for a week or more. Then they start to suffocate. So most orchards water daily. the research that has been done the last 40, 50 years has shown that daily irrigation requires less water with no disadvantages. They did studies in orchards where they watered one side once a week deeply, the other side with the same irrigation system lightly every day. The lightly every day, the roots were significantly bigger than the roots that were watered once deeply. They weren't expecting that. They thought the deep once a week irrigation would create deep roots. It did not. So nobody waters deeply once a week unless they don't have the irrigation technology to water daily lightly. So daily lightly is the right way to water a production plant. Now, if you've got landscape plants, who cares? You don't need them to produce anything. But for a production plant, the more evenly you keep the moisture in the ground, the better off the plant is. So, avocados don't care if they get wet. Any part of the tree, it's fine, nothing happens. Citrus, you have to keep the trunks dry. But avocados, no. Now, fertilizing wise, we fertilize a lot the first few years of life just to get some size. You need to get a lot of foliage. Like this tree isn't full yet, it's still quite open, so you want to get a nice ball of foliage. So they say fertilize, just keep fertilizing, no matter what fertilizer you use. Usually the ones that say fruit tree are fine. Lots of nitrogen on them for the first few year or two till they get to production size. Now, you may not want a big tree, and we're finding that, well, the researchers have already found out, they've been telling the farmers, keep your trees as small as you can maintain them because they're more productive at a smaller size. So in the old days, all the orchards, 15 foot, 20 foot, even 25 foot, and then what they would do is after they got too tall to pick, they would stump them. They would take a chainsaw and cut them off at 4 feet and let them regrow. I did that once just to see what happens, and you stump them in the wintertime, paint the stump white so they don't burn, and it would sit there for 3 months and suddenly just take off. Around May or June, just take off and grow 6 feet that year and bloom the next year. So you lost one crop. Wasn't too bad. That wasn't bad. They bloomed heavily the next spring. So it's not bad to, not terrible, but most orchards now trim annually just to keep the tree small so they have a crop every year. But what they found on fruit trees is that the most productive size of any fruit tree is 8 foot tall, 5 foot wide. Because on a full tree, the light doesn't penetrate any deeper than 2.5 foot through those leaves. So if you've got a 15 foot wide tree, you've got 10 foot of tree in the middle that can't do much. It's all done on the outer 2.5 foot of foliage. So if you keep your tree smaller, we never considered growing avocados in containers until about 3 or 4 years ago, because a friend of mine had been growing a reed avocado in a 24-inch box. So I went over his house and looked at that thing, and I counted 80 avocados on there. I'm going, boy, I was thinking maybe 5, because the way Pest produces 100 avocados on a full-size tree. This tree was only 4 foot wide and about 5 foot tall. 80 avocados, well, that goes along with this concept. The smaller the tree, the better the sunlight penetration. Your whole tree's productive. 80 avocados, that's as good as any tree will produce in a pot that size. Yes.
Does the variety matter on the avocado?
Yes, well, we'll go over that. But we think it's more of the pollination thing. So we think most avocados produce well if you can get the bees to them. But that's still by themselves, certainly. They're without honey and all that. There's some varieties that are known heavier producers than others. But, now, you can grow avocados from seed. I've grown them. The problem with seedlings, you don't know what you're going to get. Now, you might, one out of 100 may be superior avocado, but that's what you don't know. Now, most of the avocados sold were chance seedlings. Someone planted a seed and got something superior, but most of the modern ones are grown, are bred in the orchards, purposely bred with certain pollens and certain trees as a mother plant. But again, most trees were just found in people's yards from someone planting a seed. Now when you plant a seed, generally they grow for 3 or 4 years before they produce, before they start blooming. They have to be about, they go through a juvenile phase, whereas these grafted ones, they're already mature. About 5% of the trees, now certain varieties especially, maybe 3 out of 100 trees will have flowers already on them. They always want them to produce when they're this big. But when you grow them from seed, they'll tend to grow about 10 foot tall, then bloom 1 year without making fruit, then start making fruit after that. Generally on avocado seedlings, the fruit's going to be similar to the parent. Not always, but it's like your kids. Generally they'll look like you and be like you, but you can have an oddball now and then that's really different. And you just don't know. You just don't know. Just like this thing here was from a haspit. Don Gilligley in La Jolla planted a haspit back in the, I think it was 50s or so. And he got this tree that made fruit just like this. Totally different than Hass. Might taste better than Hass. So we think this may become one of our best sellers, but we don't have the trees in stock at the moment. Now, our suppliers also tell us to always recommend putting gypsum on the ground. Gypsum, which is calcium sulfate. Calcium is very important for quite a few reasons on avocado trees. Number one, well, on fruit trees in general, calcium is a part of wood. And it really is the third most important mineral in a tree. So it's nitrogen, potassium, calcium, then phosphorus. So calcium is quite important. And Brokaw on their website, I think they say 35 pounds on a mature tree every year they want to see you put down. That's a lot of calcium, 35 pounds of calcium. It does other things too. So calcium, for some reason, also helps prevent root rot disease. It helps water absorb better. It helps leach out salts from the tap water. So that's, so it does quite a few things for the tree. I swear 10 years ago their website said 50 pounds per tree, but I think now it says 35. Now sunburning, so again, watch the temperatures. If we on the real young ones, they can burn at 90 degrees. So watch the branches. Once they get a little older, again, it takes about 110 to burn them. We do sell whitewash. Now you can use white latex paint. Cut in half water or full strength if you want. It looks kind of bizarre to be that white, but half strength. Just paint the parts of the stem. Don't paint the leaves, just paint the parts of the stem that the sun can touch that the leaves don't shade. Now some people cover the whole tree in shade cloth, but that just makes the tree really weak. Don't cover it in shade cloth. You want full sun on the leaves. You just want to keep the stems from burning. If the stems do burn severely, it cuts off the circulation and the tree starts regrowing a new branch or new trunk even below the point of the burn. I had a tree once, it wasn't a Brokaw tree, so it burned at about 103 degrees, but had a branch sticking out. It burnt right here, and the whole branch broke off in 2 days. I couldn't believe how quick that happened, but it burnt. 2 days later, the branches broke off right at that burn mark. So burning is not good. Now, one of our suppliers, Charles Malky, Ivy Organics, does a professional whitewash, which is not usually available in small quantities. You know, when they do whitewash orchards, it's these big drums, that'll treat the whole orchard. He does the treatment that they use, which is dried milk, silica, which is quartz crushed down, which is diatomaceous earth. So you mix this with water and you can paint the stems with it. It lasts about a year. This is a powder in here. You can add a little bit to a cup of water, add just a little water, use part of it at a time. This is enough to treat about 5 decent sized avocado trees. Once they get big, we don't usually worry about the burning, but when they're young, it can totally burn and kill the tree if it's real bad. Now, brokaw, when they sell you trees, they always put a cardboard that is about 1.5 feet high up the trunk to prevent the whole grafted area from sunburning in case you don't whitewash your trees. The tree will regrow from within the cardboard area. So they do that. But you can just, again, paint it and you'll be fine. So just watch the temperature, 100, again 100. 90 degrees is real bad for a very baby tree. Once it's about 3 or 4 months old, it would take about 100, 110 to, about 110 to cause trouble. Now some of the other whitewashes he makes have essential oils in them, supposedly repel bugs, but that part of the product doesn't last as long. This will last a year. The repellency of the essential oils, probably about a month or so or less. He also sells a spray version of the whitewash. This will go a lot farther. And instead of white, they also give you a choice of light green or light brown if you don't want your trees to stand out so much. Okay, so we have that. Now they are training avocados in different ways now too. So again, if you keep your tree about 8 foot tall and 5 foot wide, you'll have your maximum production. A lot of the trees we're selling are rated pretty small, pretty short at least, and some are rated really small also. So it turns out, so the first avocado, that back maybe in the 70s, 60s, I don't know when they did, but University of California said they planted hundreds and hundreds of avocado pits on the property in Irvine, and they're all probably hasp pits. And what grew out of them, they selected some of the shorter, heavier producing ones. The first one they brought on the market was called Gwen, and they told us it was about an 8 to 10 foot tree. But they had suspicions about the tree being 8 or 10 foot. I mean, if it was out in the farm, it was just growing about 8 or 10 foot high. But what they did with it is they took 5 Gwens, cut off all the flowers for 5 years, and all 5 trees broke 20 foot. So in that case, they knew the tree wasn't genetically small, it just couldn't grow because of the fruit load. The annual fruit load was keeping it from growing. So all these heavy avocado producers, the fruit just keeps them hunched down. So that's one way they stay small, is because they are heavy producers. They have a new research project going on at the Irvine Field Station. I believe it's at the Irvine Field Station. In South Africa, for a long time now, they have been training avocados like apples and grapes on espalier, on wires, and growing them that way, and positive results. They said it was paying for itself to grow them that way. So the University of California right now is determining which avocados grow best with that method and how productive they'll be in your orchards that way. So that's another way to train them. So what they're saying happens is that avocado trees tend to waste a lot of their growth because they got this, nice branch sitting out here in the sunlight, getting nice sunlight, and it makes a fruit. The fruit weighs so much that the branch just dives into the darkness, never to fruit again. So the tree's got to grow another branch out in the sun, and the whole process repeated over and over and over. So it's a waste of the tree's energy, they said, to do that. So if you can support the branch out here, it just keeps producing. So that's the reason they want to espalier trees, is to keep that branch in the sunlight. Now we've noticed on people's trees, if they have a branch close to the ground, the branch close to the ground can't dive anywhere because the fruit's laying on the ground. And we've seen this twice now. At the Great Park, they have one of our Carmen avocados over there with one branch about 5 foot long on the ground. We were there counting avocados on that branch. There was 50 on that one branch. We couldn't believe it. But I've seen that at a customer's house. They had a hash tree, one branch a foot off the ground, 30, 40 avocados on that one branch. That was the heaviest branch production on the whole tree because the branch couldn't grow any, couldn't bend down and escape the sunlight. It was laying on the ground. So they have a point. If you can keep that branch out in the sunlight, supported, you may just use stakes to do that. Keep the branch supported so the fruit doesn't weigh it down. You may have a much more productive tree than without it. Because you'll notice most of the branches with avocado fruits, they're hanging in the middle of the tree. They're no longer out there, they're in the middle of the tree, in the shade.
Do you recommend pruning out some of the avocados when there's so many on one branch like that?
I don't think you have to. Now, okay, so fruit size, depends how big you want your avocados to be. So fruit size is due to two things. Amount of water you give the tree and the number of fruit on the tree. So the more fruit that's on the tree, the smaller the avocados are. Now, commercially, they don't want big avocados. You have an avocado, say, this big, you'll have to charge, a couple dollars for it. If you have avocados this big, you can charge less. So the smaller ones sell better, so they'd rather have more smaller avocados than big. For you, I don't know. You might want fewer bigger fruit. But do know that, avocados shed, most of the fruit that forms is shed during the spring and a few more during the summer. They said by September, the tree will not shed any more fruit. So at that point, if you see too much fruit on your tree, you could cut some off if you think it's gonna break the branch or something. So most avocados take 1 year to ripen from the time they bloom to the time you harvest. Some take 15, 16 months. So a lot of trees will have 2 crops on at the same time. I always told people, well, it won't be on the same branch until somebody showed me a picture of their avocado tree, fruit hanging on the end of the branch, flowers right around the fruit. So apparently they can flower while they're producing fruit at the same time. It's possible.
Hey, Gary, so in that case, when do you pick the fruit? How do you know the fruit is ready to?
You don't. You learn. You read the description and see. So someone has figured out over time when you. But it's not always right. Like reed avocados, they say pick June through November. Well, when I first grew a reed avocado, I had the crop totally eaten off by May. So reed is blooms around March, April, May. And the fruit's supposed to be on there till the next June, July, August. At this, at farmers markets they sell reed, usually July, August, September. Well, I picked mine in January and it was okay. It was much better in April, and I thought perfectly fine by May, so I just ate them. But here they're saying don't pick till June, and you can leave them on the tree till November. So you can kind of go, you can read it and say, okay, well, I like it at different other times too. So the nice about avocados, they have a long hang time. Most of them have a long hang time. Now the Mexican varieties, which ripen earlier, don't have as good a hang time. Stewart ripens in December, November, December, somewhere around there. It doesn't have as long a hang time as the ones that ripen in the spring and summer. Okay, so let's go over some of the varieties. Let's see. Oh, pests. Okay, so there are some pests. The main one you'll see is Perseiamites. Now from the back you probably can't see this. You can probably see this though. This is a very moderately infected leaf with Perseiamites. So you see these little brown spots on the leaf near the veins. Each round spot, now it's gone now, we sprayed this one, but each round spot, when it's silvery, is a little spider web with a colony of spider mites underneath it sucking on the leaf. So Perseiamites came up to California from Mexico 20 years ago. And at that time, there were no natural predators for it, so we just hit them once with a good spray of neem oil. And that cleaned them up. One dose of that cleaned them up. We didn't have any more attacks for another year or two. So that was a fairly easy one. If the tree's small, if it's bigger, then you'll have to get the hose out and blast away. Now what they've done is, now this bug spreads throughout the neighborhoods pretty well because it not only affects avocados, it also can affect camphor trees, which is a popular street tree. So it just goes through the neighborhoods. So what the University of California did, they went down to Mexico, or it might have been Cuba, I'm not sure exactly where Persea mites originated, but they found another mite that eats this one. So they introduced it into the orchards so they wouldn't have to do the spraying, because spraying with oil in an orchard is quite expensive. You know, for one tree or a couple trees in your yard, it's not much price, not much cost, but for an orchard, it's quite a bit. So what happens now is you'll get a wave of Persea mites going through a neighborhood every few years, and the good mites are not far behind. Everything blows in the wind. These are so small, they just blow in the wind. So the bad mites find you first. The good mites are coming around and finishing and cleaning up. So if you don't spray and it's not too bad, you don't have to do anything. The good mites are there. Before we had the good mites, a real bad tree would just totally foliate, which of course cured itself, and then regrow another set of leaves, and it'd be fine again. Now avocados generally can put on a new set of leaves once a season, or at least every 4 months. 3 to 4 months they put on a new set of leaves. Sometimes the old ones fall off, sometimes they'll hold the old leaves for a year or so, but they can put on a new set of leaves about every 3 to 4 months. So these guys grow, you know, right now their spring push, it'll get them up to about this height. Summer push will get them up to about this height. And then fall, they can push another set of leaves out. They'll get you up pretty good size by that time. So that's Persea mites. The neem oil will work. The horticultural oils, which are cheaper than neem, will work also. There's one other product that we were told is really good for avocados if you have root rot problems. South Africa found that this product called Garden Phos, which is mono and dipotassium salts and phosphorus acid, which are both fertilizers for the plant. In some states, this is registered as a fertilizer, and our state's registered as a fungicide. But they said if you spray this on the foliage, you'll increase the phosphorus level of the sap. The phosphorus is involved in fighting diseases, and they've been able to pretty much cure. Now they do it a different way. If they have an avocado tree that's on its last legs, they'll actually inject this into the trunk of the tree with an injector. And they said they've been able to save avocado trees that they normally would have thrown away and cured them with this product. So it is capable of curing root rot pretty well used that way. If you just spray on the leaves, it may not do as good a job. They used to have instructions on here for soil drenching, but it's been taken off. I don't know if there's a problem with that, getting into the groundwater or whatnot. But anyway,
What's the name of it?
Garden Phos. But it's a combination of phosphorus and potassium.
How much is it, Gary?
$29. We use it for a lot of other purposes. So there's a disease out there called downy mildew that came in that affects roses, although it only affects them during the rainy season, affects impatiens, affects onions, and affects basil really bad. So the basil leaves, you know, if you get them wet at night, they just turn yellow and gray by the next morning, and the plant defoliates and it dies. Spray this on there, it cures them. There's no wait time in here because it's not considered a pesticide, it's considered a fertilizer. But it is registered as a fungicide in California, but there's no wait time listed. They don't tell you, they say you can spray this and eat something. But it's not considered a poison. Okay, let's go over some of the varieties. Now, we don't sell Fuerte and Hass anymore because compared to the varieties we do sell, they weren't as good a producer. Although again, if you hit them with the honey and the water, that can help them tremendously. But since we have, so the main avocado we've been selling the last 20 years is called Carmen. The official name in the patent office is Haas Mendez strain, Carlos Mendez, so they've abbreviated instead of having to say Haas Mendez strain, now it's just called Carmen. Carlos Mendez found a Hass tree in a Hass orchard down in Mexico that was capable of blooming repeatedly. They told us 2 to 3 times a year. In my backyard, I've seen this thing bloom 4 times in 1 year. It doesn't do it every year, and not every tree will do it every year, but in general, they can produce more than 1 set of flowers. There's not many avocados that can do that. People have told me that their Hass tree does that in their yard, but the problem we've had is reproducing that. That is taking branches off of their tree and making new trees that do the same thing. Well, this one is the first one they've seen multiple blooms that all its babies do it too. So it's a mutation of Hass. You know, maybe the same genetics or maybe something else in it that mutated. So it can bloom more than once a year. The growers, Brokaw Nursery has been selling up to 250,000 of these to orchards a year to replace the Hass trees. So it is real popular. It's been out there again for about 20 years now. The patent wore off, so we can legally, officially sell it to you. That was 2 years ago. We had sold it for a number of years before they discovered that we weren't supposed to sell it to you. But now that the patent's worn off, we can sell it. So Carmen has been our top seller. It's not as good tasting as some of the top tasting ones, but again, as this is your store fruit, a lot of the avocados at the supermarket are Carmen. And you know, again, it's genetically it's the same as Hass, so no different than Hass, but it can produce fruit year round. The interesting thing about this is that the farmers can tell which crop it is because the fruit resulting from each blooming season is different shaped. Of course, it'll be different size too. But they found that, you know, when it blooms, earlier in the year it blooms, the more pear-shaped they are. The later in the year they bloom, the more round-shaped they are. Now, reed avocados bloom into summer, they're round. And when this one blooms in summer, its fruit's rounded too. So apparently the shape of the fruit is maybe due to the season rather than the variety. Might be due totally to the temperature when they're blooming. Anyway, Carmen. So in an orchard of Carmen trees, they said you can go in there any day you want and pick fruit. If you only have one Carmen tree, it might have one crop on it. It might have a different season crop on it. It may not do at every season. Now, some of our customers swear theirs do. So there are some trees that might do that, have fruit on it all the time. 1 year my tree did, but most years it has one crop on it. This year it's blooming right now lightly, so I figured it'll bloom again in summer more heavily. We'll see what happens. But that's Carmen. So if you only have room for one tree, it may be the one to go for just because you potentially can get fruit at all times. But again, it's better to have more than one Carmen if you want that to happen. But so Carmen is a Hass type. Another Hass type one we carry is Gwen. So Gwen was one of the early Hass offspring. Pretty much same ripening period, spring into summer. No, it says April through September, yes, late mid-spring. So it's a little later than Hass. Hass is more February through June, and Gwen is a little bit later, they're saying. Again, you can probably pick it at the same time, but it's best at April through September. And again, Gwen has some shortcomings, so they don't really sell much anymore. What it used to do that was scary was defoliate when it flowers. Now, a lot of avocados do that, but Gwen does it really a lot. So every winter, the trees will be totally naked, and if we had a heat wave in the winter, you get a lot of sun burning. So they've kind of gone away from Gwen, but a couple of Gwen's daughters are now some of the big hits. So Lamb, or Lamb Hass, but they're shortening it to Lamb. The Lamb Ranch grew one of the offspring of Gwen, and it is a crazy producer. I mean, we've seen trees this big with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of flowers on this crazy bloomer and producer. It says they're later than the Hass, so it's June through December. So that's not a bad fall crop, because it's pretty much as good as, well, some of the fruit you eat at the store is Gwen, some is Lamb Hass. Another of the daughters of Gwen, yes.
How is the taste of that?
Gwen?
Quality of the,
Well, they consider it not as good as Hass,
oh,
but it's, you know, the quality of the fruit at the store ranges from good to, from fair to excellent, just because of the way it's picked and stored, and it's handling problem. So, you know, if the farm doesn't get them out of the sunlight quickly, they taste cooked. It's more handling than anything else. So Gwen well, you know, people who have Gwen trees love them. Off the tree, handled properly, it's quite good. But, you know, their sheet says, University of California says it's just good, it's not excellent, like the rest of, you know, like most of these. But still, it's better, it's as good or better than the stuff you buy in the stores. Or again, it's some of the ones at the store are Gwen, maybe that's why some of the store ones don't taste as good. Lamb is considered a little bit lower quality than regular Hass. It tends to pick up a few strings now and then in the flesh, but we've eaten good lambs, so it's still really good. Another daughter of Gwen that we don't have right now is Jim. I'll put it over here. Ray Edward Martin was the guy who was responsible, so he put his initials on it. So Jim, legally we can sell this in about 2 years. Last year we're always trying to get some through other channels. I don't know if I can get any this year through any channels. So, but Jim is another daughter of Gwen, and it is the one that University of California is promoting as the ideal version of Hass. So one crop a year. This is gem fruit. It's a little bigger than Hass. Smaller tree, heavier producer. So again, the best version of Hass, but one crop a year. We're picking gem right now, so probably about the same season as Hass. I don't have the official specs on it. Then Surprise. I think this is the great granddaughter of Hass. It's a little more Mexican, but of these, it's the only one that's a type B. So a lot of the orchards are just saying, okay, plant gems and put Surprise with it. So you have a bee out there, bee type flower out there. It may not do any pollination, but at least you have it. So Surprise, and plus you can sell Surprise as a Hass. It does have thinner skin. It's a little more Mexican than the Hass is. And it ripens a little bit earlier because it's more Mexican, so it's March through July. Well, it's about the same time as Hass. I was told it's a little earlier, but this says March through July. So that's another offspring of Hass that's sold at the stores as Hass. Trying to check and see if there's any more offspring. That's all that we sell. These four here. Whitsol's another one that's out there. That's another daughter of Hass. That was a B type also, but even weaker than Gwen was. So Whitsol's no longer being sold. There's a few others, but I don't. They're real oddballs that are out there, but we don't sell them. Okay, so that's the Hass type fruit. Hass is about 95% of the entire commercial production. The other one that's grown is reed. Now, we first heard about reed from a Hass grower. He says, I grow Hass on my farm. We grow reed to eat, because they're much better than Hass. Tell them it's like taking a Hass and pouring bacon grease on it. So they're about 2% oilier than Hass. They are really good. They're the big round avocados, about that size and shape. A little bit less round than that. And they are, again, supposed to pick June through December, so you usually see them in the summertime. It's actually a daughter of Nabal. Now, we haven't gotten our Nabal trees in yet. Hopefully we still get them. So, Nabal is a big avocado tree if you don't prune it. Reed is a narrow tree. I've seen full-grown reeds 20 foot tall, but only 8 foot wide. So they say it's a good backyard tree because it's narrow. It doesn't take up much space. You just top it, keep it short so you can pick it. Again, that was one my friend had that was 4x5, 80 avocados. So they can produce, they generally produce, they haven't done much research on production of avocado trees. So, because they have to do it over a long period, it's gotta be commercial crops. So reed, they've done studies on it. They said, yeah, it's 300% more productive than the original Hass was. And that's mainly because they get a crop every year. And that's mainly because they bloom later than the other avocado trees. April, May, June, rather than February, March, April, or even December, January, February, so that it's warmer, the bees are out. They said reed rarely ever misses a good crop because of that. Nabal, on the other hand, we've eaten Nabal. It might be better than reed, but it's a definite alternate bearer, which means you get a huge crop one year, and because they spent so much energy on that crop, they make nothing the next year. And then because they made nothing the next year, they make a huge crop again. They just go back and forth like that. Now, you might be able to train half your tree so that you're alternating on two sides, where you pick up all the fruit on one side, so that side doesn't waste any energy. But one of our customers who has Nabal says he has been able to get it to not be an alternate bearer. Yes?
And are these both A type like the last list, or are these?
Nabal's a B, reed's an A. So these are more true Guatemalan avocados, where the other ones were Mexican, Guatemalan. These are true Mexican types, Guatemalan types, which means they're very sensitive to cold. Now, I didn't grow on reed back in the 1990 freeze. 1990 was supposedly the coldest temperatures ever recorded in California. Now, of course, we've only been recording weather since about 1870, so our history here isn't that long. But in 1990, here, 23 degrees, 2 days in a row. That's the record. Our Whitzel trees just froze to the ground. They couldn't handle that at all. And these would have frozen, I would think, also, especially if they were young. The older trees made it through. But 1990 was, San Francisco was 13, Escondido was 13 degrees. I mean, they grow avocados there. It would have been a real nasty event if, for them if they didn't have their heaters on and all that. Now, most of the avocados are actually grown on hills. So when you have a hill, the cold air, I don't know if they realize how noisy. Okay, so on hills, the cold air does drop low. So the cold air doesn't cling to the top hills, it drops just like water does. So in 1990, when we had that bad freeze, you can look out through our nursery and see the frost layer was about this high off the ground. Everything below 3 feet was frozen solid, everything above that wasn't frozen. So you can look at plants and you can see the freeze line that hit because cold air just drops lower. So as all the little plants were all frozen on the ground. Everything on the tables was fine, so it's real odd what freeze can do. Anyway, so we have the reed and the ball. Now the top rated avocado we sell is Charwell. Now because it came through California from Kona, Hawaii, they picked up the name Kona Charwell, but it's from Australia, so the proper name on that is Charwell. And that is the top rated taste-wise that we sell. There's another one they rate a little higher called Jan Boyce, which nobody that we're in contact with grows commercially. There is someone down in San Diego County growing it. I don't know how good their trees are. We do grafting a little bit now and then, but we just can't get the numbers up at the time. But I've eaten every single one of the top 10, and hard to say one's better than another. Unless you eat them all at the same time, I don't think you'll be able to tell. They're all really, really good. Charwell has the advantage of a couple advantages. The fruit can hang 10 months after being ripe. So even though it says it's best around April, it pretty much will hang until the next January. So it's got the longest hang time, they said, of any avocado. Now, one of my customers and my own self, our trees are ground cover. We can't get them off the ground. Now, we had a batch of Charwells that was grown on a clonal rootstock. I'll have to mention the clones in a second here. But it was a dwarfing clonal rootstock, so that might have something to do with it. But the Charwell in my house, after about 8 years, it's like 2 foot tall. It's 6 foot wide. It just won't go upwards at all. And he says his doesn't do that either. His won't grow upwards. It just stays on the ground. So we'll see. I have another Charwell that's on seedling rootstock like these, and that one is growing more normally. So the true Mexican avocados we do have are Bacon and Stewart's. This one's green when it's ripe, this one's black when it's ripe. They both have thin skin. They both can handle down into the mid-20s. So, you know, if you're inland or in a canyon around here, or in Fresno, or somewhere where it gets colder in the winter, these are the two that they grow, so we actually carry them more for that purpose. Stewart is actually pretty good tasting. Bacon is good if you leave it on till the very end. So bacon was always promoted as November through January. November and December, it tastes like water. At about mid-January, it actually, you know, even though it's named after a person, it actually kind of tastes like bacon to me. At the end of January into February, and then falls off by March. So, not bad. This is kind of a brilliant chartreuse color inside, brighter than the other avocados. The skin on Stewart's so thin that some people just eat the skin. Hard to peel it.
What's typically sold in the market? Is different years, or I mean different months of the year in the stores?
That was these. So these are the commercial avocado trees.
Okay.
Yeah, they don't, rarely do you see anything else at the supermarket than this list. And Hass is on there, of course, Hass is the main one. But with Brokaw selling, you know, 300,000 trees other than Hass every year, eventually most of them will be these other varieties that are better than Hass. Okay, so there's some things on here we've not eaten before. Now, Edronol, we're growing this because we've never eaten it before. It says it's excellent, but we just don't know. So of course, because we had this tree sitting out there, all the Edronols are gone. We only ordered 20 of them because last year we didn't sell any. But beautiful tree and impressive fruit.
Is Jim Bacon and Bacon the same?
No, Jim Bacon is, and now it's called Jim instead of Jim Bacon because it's confusing. But Jim Bacon is the guy who developed both. And Jim is supposed to be an improvement over Bacon, but I haven't eaten Jim Bacon. I've eaten the bacon, not the Jim Bacon. But it's confusing. So anyway, Edronol, I'm out of stock this year again. You know, last year we got into 500 little grafted trees, and those were gone in 2 weeks. So this year we ordered 1,500. So we got a lot more this year. We got in 930 We're waiting for our Don Gilliglees. We have 250 of those coming in the balls, maybe 50 of those. So we're still waiting for quite a few to arrive. Anyway, we're out of the Edgernols. We'll see what that tastes like. Ester, we haven't eaten before. That's why I'm growing this Ester. Last year we sold them too fast. It has a reputation as being real good, so this year I decided I better save one and grow it to see what it tastes like. Holiday, got to mention holiday. We have a holiday tree out there. This is the one that University of California says is the best homeowner avocado. They said it's the shortest tree they've ever grown. They can't make it grow tall. Our tree out there, massive plant, same age as this, but it's only about this, it's this wide and about 4 foot. And it's just, the branch is doing this. The leaves are smaller. This is the branch off the holiday. So the leaves are smaller on it, closer together. Makes big fruit though. Holiday makes big fruit, twice as big as most avocados on a real small tree. And it looks like it's a heavy producer too. So they promote it now. On their official website, they have hesitations about it because homeowners have had so much trouble with the trees, but that's because they had 2 retail growers growing it and selling it, and they're all dying because of the soil that they were growing it in. One was 75% sawdust, the other one's about 40% ground up bark. Yeah, it gave the tree a bad reputation. So it's not the tree's fault. If you get one of ours, they'll grow real nicely. So that's supposed to be the smallest of all the avocado trees. And that's all of them except for, you know, the Don Gilliglee. I've got a ripe one here, so after class I'll cut this open. On the internet, there's a little bit of information about Don Gilliglee. We ate one for the first time 2 years ago. And of course, you know, we didn't have comparison. We didn't have all the other avocados around, but we said, this is as good as anything we've ever eaten. It's a bit spicier than most avocados, so you don't have to add as much to make good guacamole out of it. Hopefully this is properly ripe. It's split up on the tree, so hopefully it's not rotten in there. One other note, there is literature article in a journal, agricultural journal, swearing that if you plant alfalfa with your avocado trees, they mature much quicker. Something about coexistence with alfalfa. They said the part of the orchard where they put alfalfa in with the trees produced a crop within 1 year. Of course, same age. I mean, you know, that we've done it ourselves, so it's not, it might have been their batch of trees more than the alfalfa, but they actually did a research project on the alfalfa and avocado trees. Okay, what we're gonna do, show you how we plant, so you know how to handle these. Now, it just so happens that one bag, the smaller bag of our top pot's enough to fill one of these. Now, we have used ones and new ones. If you get a used one, it's nice to wash it out because you don't know if something was rotting in there. The new ones are $3.29 for a new 5-gallon bucket. The used ones are $1.99, so if you want to spend $1.25, you can get a new one. So we'll put about 3 inches of this at the bottom of there first, just to get it up to the right height. Check the height. You want the seed to be slightly above the soil surface. We want to put the dirt in here within about a ½ inch of the surface, just because you water a few times, it does settle a little bit, so you don't want it to be too far down, but not all the way to the top, then you couldn't add the water properly. So this is about the right height here. and take a nice sharp box cutter. Now, these little things here could be roots, but they're usually just air pockets. But you hate to cut through too deeply and cut all your roots off on one side. But a sharp box cutter won't go, you know, you can be very shallow and it won't cut through the root. So you just cut up one side gently. And now it's slit open. Oh yeah. One second. I should use gloves on. I worked with gloves for 10 years and my skin got so dry from working with dirt. Now I make sure I wear gloves when I handle soil.
What's the mixture of water to honey that you would use to spray?
Good point. The original said 3 parts water, 1 part honey, so 1/4 honey. Some of our customers said you can go less than that, maybe 1/6 honey and still get good results. Might even be less than that because bees can smell honey so well. Sugar doesn't work, but honey they can smell. So.
Okay.
You get one of your assistants said that about a teaspoon for a quart of water. And I've used about that portion of working.
Okay, teaspoon per quart, he says, of water. So yeah, we use, this is my spritzer bottle. I put hot water in it first, add the honey, shake it up real good and go. So peel that off carefully, try not to break the root ball in half. Set it in there and then just put the dirt around it.
Has something been done to that little thing so you know that it's going to produce fruit?
Yeah, well, it's grafted, and I didn't even talk about that. So
Okay.
the way they grow these things, so this pot's just big enough to hold 1/2 seed. I mean, Zutano seeds. So they usually use Zutano seeds because they have the Zutano trees for pollination and they have nothing to do with the fruit. So in this case, they're using all the fruit to get the seeds out. Zutano pits are really big. So we noticed that, you know, like last year, they ran out of the Zutano seeds, so they used half pits, which are browner and smaller. And we noticed the trees on all the half pits were a lot smaller than the trees on the Zutano. So the fact that this Zutano seed's so big helps the baby tree. So even though you can make branches root by air layering them or making cuttings, this is really a benefit to the new plant to have this huge seed feeding it. It's a lot faster. What they call it a nurse seed. The seed's so big on an avocado that you can get a lot of growth on this tree without any other help. So they grow the pit for about 3 months. They plant the pits in spring, and they grow the tree for maybe 3 months, and then cut off the top right here in a V shape and put in a short branch. The branch that they put on was this long, right where this joint is, and they grafted it onto this in a greenhouse, of course, and then it started growing. So they did this sometime last summer, late summer, August, September, and then it grew a couple flushes of growth. This might have been the first flush, and this is the second one, a lot stronger flush. And then they'll sometimes, you know, they'll make another branch a little bit lower and it takes over the whole plant. You just don't know when at this stage what will be the main trunk, although they are very apical dominant. So if you make this branch straight up with the stake, it usually is the one that's going to be the main trunk. But sometimes another one just shoots out and takes over. So this is on seedling root. So on seedling root, the problem we have is that every seed, even though they're all Zutano seeds, they're like your kids. Every seed is genetically different. So the seed doesn't affect the fruit as much as it does some other parts of the tree, the growth, the speed of growth, the shape perhaps. So in an orchard with seedling rootstocks, you can get lots of different shapes of trees and sizes of trees and vigorousness, because every seed is different. The roots are of a different quality. So the orchards would rather not have that, plus a few seeds will be really bad, and that tree might just, well, a lot of times it doesn't get much beyond this size. There's something wrong with the seed genetically, it just came out wrong. You know, if you have 20 kids, you'll know that you'll have a few really bad apples here and there. So that same thing happens in orchards too. They have all different sized trees and they want everything to be alike. So most orchards now, 9% of trees sent to orchards are cloned. The roots are cloned instead. Now cloning, and we'll get those trees in later, much more expensive because they have to graft these twice. So what they do on those, we'll just stop right there and so they have this little thing where they have the original seed growing and the trunk growing off of that. Then they graft on this tree that's the rootstock tree. And it grows just like this one's growing. And they grow it for several months. And then what they do is they actually, I'm not sure if they change pots or not, but it ends up in a larger container. What they do for a while, they take this plant that's a little bigger than this, and they stick it in a darkened greenhouse for a while. They call it etiolation. The plant thinks it's underground. So all these signals to the plant that says make roots because you're underground start operating. So when they bury the tree in this dirt, and they do one other thing, they have a metal ring attached right there on the base of that, right above the graft, there's another ring, which will cut this off eventually. It'll sever the seedling part of it as it grows. So it forces the rootstock tree to grow roots. The seedling tree has roots down here, and this rootstock tree is now making roots there. As this thing constricts it, it forces it to make roots. And then they graft on top of this the tree that they want. Now, the way they find these rootstock trees, now, all the way in the past, most of the rootstocks were chosen because they survived flooding. So an orchard had flooded, a couple trees survived. In those days, you know, most orchards were on seedling roots, so every rootstock was genetically different. They found this trees that survived and called them the survival roots. So they encouraged the roots to grow and then took branches off of them. Most of them, again, were related to Zutano or one of the the bigger, stronger avocado seed type things. So this genetic version of Zutano right here had stronger roots than the rest of the orchard, so they choose this rootstock, give it a name, test. Of course, they test it to see how strong it is against root rot, and then they start using that to create the clone roots, and then they graft the branch on top of that of the one that you want. So if you get one of these 3-gallon sleeves of clonal roots, you can open it up. You'll see dead roots at the bottom from the original seed root. And then you'll see the new roots from the clone roots, the clone tree right there. And then this part on top. So it's got 2 grafts on it. They cost a lot more, pretty much double, well, third more of what they would otherwise. We'll be selling those for $95. The only problem with the ones we get is the university told them to put ground up wood in here. So they have what looks like cedar strips. I don't know what kind of wood it is. I didn't ask them. Well, I don't try to get into a brawl with my growers anymore because I know they can't help it. The university's told them to do this. So they have a bunch of wood in here. It doesn't seem to be bad enough, and this is so skinny also, it's not that big an area. You know, if it was this wide of ground up wood, I would say, okay, that's gonna kill the tree. But it's so skinny that it seems not to matter. I have taken some of broke out trees, bare rooted them, and didn't bare root some of them and didn't see much difference. So, you know, it could be that my bare rooting caused so much damage you don't see any difference. I don't know what would happen if they did this in perfect soil. it might be incredible. But we get such good results with these that we don't seem to bother with going that way. Now, a lot of the new rootstocks they bring in are not for rot resistance anymore, because that's not the main problem, drought resistance. So they're bringing in a lot of rootstocks from Israel who always been bothered with drought. They're still finding which ones won't burn the tips as easily, because the ones that are too sensitive to drought, the soil dries up, the tree's sucking too much salt up, the leaves start burning up like crazy. So they're finding roots that apparently don't suck the salt up with the last bit of water, and they look better when under drought conditions. So that's the goal now, is more going that direction rather than, but for the most part, farms do it because they want a more uniform looking orchard. They want all the trees to grow alike, and for that, it's nice if the roots are genetically identical. For a homeowner, it's not that important. I mean, you might be real unlucky and get one out of 20 or 30 that doesn't grow at all because of the root genetics, but it's a smaller chance. So anyway, let's finish this guy. So we just put the soil around it. And if your tree's leaning a little bit, you can kind of push the soil in on the opposite side. It makes it lean the other direction a little bit, and then firm it up good. I like to vibrate them or shake them a little bit to get that soil settled a little more. This could use a little bit more dirt in it. The seed's still exposed, so I'm good. So we'll use, I told you the whole bag, so. And when you water it, the soil will sink about an inch after a couple irrigations, and then it'll just stay at that point the rest of the time. So I can see a little bit of the seed. And then what I'll do is, here at the nursery, we want them to grow fast, so we'll put a scoop of Osmocote, just about 2 tablespoons or so of Osmocote fertilizer. Time release chemical. The problem we have with potting soil is that there's no ecosystem in here yet. The organic fertilizers we use will take about 3 to 4 weeks to kick in. So we'll do this, but we'll also put the organic, this is some organic, of that organic fertilizer. We'll throw about the same amount of that on there too. So that won't work right away, but it will introduce the bacteria and the fungi that are needed later on to make the organic fertilizers work. And then we'll water it immediately. That's why I don't want to do this for you, because you'll have to take home a soggy plant, because this is such a skinny root ball and that soil is dry that it can die within a half hour if I don't get that thing watered really quick. And then, just because I want to do it now rather than later, I'll put the stake in. And a lot of times in our growing ground, I'll set the stake on the sunny side, on the sunniest side, southwest facing, so that the stake itself protects the young branch from burning. And then just tie this up. Now, you don't need a straight trunk. If you look at pictures of Brokaw's orchards, a lot of their trees branch at just a foot or two off the ground and go sideways. They'd rather keep them shorter. So they don't have, their trees, usually their trees come with about a 30 to 40 inch stake on. No, it's about 30 inches. It's not very, it's a 4-foot stake, but 18 inches is in the ground. So it's 30 inches above ground, and that's all they need of a straight trunk. That's all they require. And if the tree goes sideways after that, they're fine with that. But again, if you train your tree to be narrow and slender so that it's more productive, then you might want to have a single straight trunk. So I usually put a couple tines on it and then water it thoroughly. And that's done. So we did this one last week when the trees first arrived. Now some of our plants are bigger than others. We think they graft the slowest growing varieties first, then graft the faster ones later during, because you know, if they're grafting, I don't know how many trees they graft, they must graft, they're selling 300,000 bigger trees, and then they do ours too. They pretty much graft trees for all the local, you know, the retail growers buy the same trees that we do from Brokaw. They just grow them in lousy soil and we grow them in perfect soil. So if they're grafting for everybody, they must graft 1 million trees a year. So I don't know, you know, this one was grafted apparently after that one was, or it grows slower. We know reed is a slow growing tree, so they probably grafted those earlier. Okay, any questions?
Is the stake ever removed?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, usually in orchards, they just leave it there. They have a thicker stake and they just leave it there. It just falls off after about 3 or 4 years. So, yes?
About pollination, when we have windy weather, doesn't that make the tree pollinate itself?
Probably not too much.
Okay.
Supposedly avocado pollen blows in the wind, that's why people allergic to avocados have such trouble with it. But it may not be enough pollen to I don't know, because the bees aren't there, you don't get anything.
So if you want to try using a brush, is there a time of day you should do it?
Well, midday is when you'll see both male and female.
Like noon?
Right, but you, again, the tree's not total synchrony, so you might find a whole branch that's off that you can use, or get 2 different avocados and do it, but they said at noon there's a lot of overlap between male and female. Yes?
2 questions. What is considered a younger tree?
Well, we call these younger trees, they're too young really to put out in an orchard, because they're just out of the greenhouse essentially. They've been brought out of the greenhouse a week ago, really. And they have to get used to the sunlight a little better. I mean, this one burnt just a little bit right there, but that's not bad. I mean, we put ours out in full sun, but it hasn't been 100 degrees. You know, occasionally in April you'll see 100 degrees.
I got 2 of the Carmen and the Charlotte, and they're in these pots for less than a week. So when you said water lightly, when I first planted it, I watered it.
I didn't say water lightly, I said water thoroughly.
Well, yeah, but after it's been done, water thoroughly, you said then you can water lightly at one point.
We'll keep it moist.
So
If
how do
this
you do
looks,
that?
well, so this looks wet. If it looks dark like that, it's wet. If it ever looks dry, now, we don't really hesitate at our growing ground. We just water it. Even if it looks wet, we water it. It doesn't matter if it's, you know, it can grow in water.
Okay.
Our soil is perfect soil, so you can keep it, you know, if you wanted to, you want to save water, put a tray underneath it, catch the water, let it sit in water, it's fine. There's no problem with that.
Question, can you grow it in a pot like that for a long time, or does it have to be?
Good question. So container plants in general, 10 years of good service out of container plant. Beyond that, it usually goes downhill. So my father was a bonsai artist, and that's what they're into, is container growing. And they said in the book that some plants can go 10 years between fixing the dirt, and some plants need to be fixed every 2 years. Well, most bigger pots and bigger plants, you can go about 10 years without having to do anything. So what happens is trees have to grow into virgin soil to keep their roots healthy. Every year they grow new roots, every year the older roots die off, so you get dead roots around your plant. That's what kills them, is their own dead root system. So you have to be able to put virgin soil in here now and then. So 10 years is about the limit for any bonsai plant, he would pull the plant out of the pot. Of course, you can't pull it out of there too easily. Pull it out of the pot, carefully take off about half the soil with sticks and brushes and things like that. Replace the soil, trim the top of the plant back so it wouldn't go into shock from that procedure, and then away he goes for another 10 years. Now, in France back in the 1800s, they kind of knew this, or they learned it anyway, because they were the first ones that had citrus trees in big pots. So there are things on the internet showing the designs of the boxes they created with removable sides. So you can, and some of our customers showed us their boxes that they made. So you can remove one side, replace it on one side, put it back. Next year, replace it on this side, put it back. So you can keep rotating the soil, put new soil in and keep them fresh. To me, it's just easier to start it, since we've seen this 2 years from here to there, just plant a new tree. It's easier. Wood boxes, in case you're wondering, properly made redwood box, between 5 and 10 year lifespan on that box. Half barrels, if you get a really nice half barrel, it can go 20 years. But a lot of the barrels they're selling have been used so many times by whiskey makers and other makers that they're falling apart by the time you get them. So the quality is all over the place. Black plastic has the disadvantage of getting hot. I mean, our grower Brokaw, in their bigger containers, when we first bought them, they were in white plastic. They said, oh, that prevents the sunburn. But they found out soon enough, it's too cold. So we only have, they're in Ventura, so it's cooler there. They said it's only 2 months of the year they have to worry about the heat in this and the black plastic. The rest of the year it's so cool there that the black is actually beneficial to get them to grow faster. So they went back to black. White was too cool. They do though, they have these arranged in rows 4 deep. The edges of them, if they have a real hot summer, you can see they whitewash. They painted them white on one side, the side facing the aisle was painted white just to cool them off a little bit. So the black plastic now, this is flat, so it gets worse. These are tapered, so it's not quite as bad. The sun can't hit them as flush. But they do mention that on a hot day, potentially, if it's like 100 degrees, you can lose up to 40% of your root system from the heat. Now we haven't seen that in avocados. You put a rose out in a black plastic in a hot summer day, that plant looks cooked. Apple trees look cooked. Cherry trees are sometimes killed by the heat. Avocados, they love heat, but you can burn a lot of the roots on that side of the plastic because this gets well over 100 degrees, 130 degrees, 140 degrees even on that black plastic. So if you just shade it or paint it white, that'll help that if you want the black plastic to be a permanent pot. Because we do have 25-gallon size containers, which are about the same size as the box, just a little bit smaller box, and they last a lot longer than wood. Yes?
Once you've planted the sleeve into the 3-gallon or 5-gallon, do you greenhouse that 3-gallon or 5-gallon, or do you put it into dark?
Well, once I get done with this size, which is 3.8 gallons, it's fine to go in the ground. It's big enough.
Once it's in that, once you planted it from the sleeve into there.
Right.
Once, it takes 3 months to grow, the 3 months, would you keep it in a greenhouse? Or
No.
put it outside?
Yeah, well, potentially if it was colder this winter, it might do better in a greenhouse. But the last few years, we just had them out in the open in an orchard with other avocado trees, and they've been fine. We just know that this keeps the roots warmer for the first few months of their life, and we don't want to, hurt them. We do have problems, if they're in the ground, they're that small, they're going to get stepped on or hit by a hose or something. So, yes.
Being as you said that putting wood in the soil is bad for the tree, and a lot of the soils for them that are made for them, like the Kellogg citrus makes, they say to use for that. I'm getting distracted from my main question anyway. What's your opinion on mulching avocado trees?
You like, well, in nature, it's dead avocado leaves. They like a lot of dead avocado leaves. You know, the all orchards used to remove them because they thought they would rot the roots. But then when they did research, they found that a chemical coming out of decaying avocado leaves actually prevented root rot. So now they just leave them all piled up. One of my friends went down to Guatemala to the wild orchard, or wild forest, and found some avocado trees with 5 foot of dead leaves underneath them. So it can get pretty deep. Now, we like to see some kind of mulch on the ground because the soil temperature certainly is key. You know, they like it up to 85 degrees, but if you have bare dirt underneath a young avocado tree and it's 90 degrees out, that soil where the roots are could be well over 120. If it's bare dirt, no mulch, 90-degree day. So mulching it, they did this day in Texas where they mulched an grapefruit orchard with 3 inches of mulch. Soil temperature went down from 120 down to 86. And 86 is that's the best temperature for growing roots, is right at 86 degrees. So mulching on top. Now, this time of year you want the soil to be warmer, so you may not want to mulch it quite yet. But come summer, you put the mulch on top and then just keep it there. So, and if you don't have avocado leaves, you know, it'll take a few years to get, even for this tree to get enough leaves. Like in my house, whenever I hedged my bushes, I would just throw the leaves underneath the avocado tree, try to pile it up underneath there.
And then you were talking about the watering, so mulching would help the watering. How, if you do that, how can you reduce how often you have to water then?
Well, again, you want to maintain, so the only thing you do is check the moisture depth. If you can push a stick in foot and a half, you're fine. If you can push it in 2 feet, you're wasting water. So you just have to figure out, now mulching is, you know, prevents evaporation, it helps the water absorb more efficiently. And in theory, moisture condenses at night into the mulch, so you're actually creating some moisture. They did a study up, well, it's happened in 2 places I know of. So in Texas, during a real bad drought 20, 30 years ago, they were grinding up all the dead trees on one side of the highway and just left them there. They said that side of the highway greened up, and they just couldn't believe it. Where the mulch was piled up, it greened up. Of course, Texas is 85, 90% humidity. And at night, they said the moisture just condenses, and then it just makes the ground wet there. But an orchard up in the Pacific Northwest said, yeah, they had water all summer, but the forest next to them were always green, so they'd walk in there, and all that leaf underground was just soggy. So they started doing that in their orchard, and they haven't watered since the 80s. So it does create some moisture to have something. You know, they said they go 1.5 foot deep.
But would the collected moisture, like, would it have the same effect or cause the same problems as the wood in the ground in the?
No, if the air can get through the mulch you're using, the oxygen still makes it to the roots. So it's more of again, it's an oxygen thing. If you use too fine a mulch, like grass clippings, they say never more than an inch or so, because the air can't get through grass clippings. But these orchards, they just said, okay, call the tree companies, and whatever trees they're chopping up, they would just haul them to the orchard and lay it down. That's pretty coarse stuff. And in nature, leaves are pretty coarse, especially avocado leaves. The air can get through a pretty thick palm, apparently. So the roots get enough oxygen that way. But you wouldn't want it buried in the ground next to them. That's the main thing. So, you know, they make most potting, well, almost, there's only a few potting soils that aren't made out of ground up trees. And someday they'll figure it out, so.
What about composting on top of those trees? Is that okay?
Well, you don't have to compost anything. Nature recycles dead stuff, usually with the fungus, and composting is by bacteria. Fungus is faster. So they've documented now that a tree can get the nutrients out of a leaf that fell off it within 90 days using the mycorrhizal fungus recycling system that all trees operate with. So there are a lot of, you know, what they found out is 80% of the roots of a tree were not the tree's roots at all. It's actually a fungus that's masquerading as the tree's roots that's coming up into the dead areas and breaking down the leaves and putting the nutrients back into the tree. So, there's what looked like roots growing in the dead leaves. It's actually the fungus. Yes.
So a quick question. When this is ready to get transplanted into the ground, and how would I do a mound to keep the dirt, I guess, I wouldn't know how to do a mound, so how would you create the mound, and would you use the dirt from that?
This is too loose for making mounds out of, in my opinion, unless you have a planter bed built around it, a wall of bricks or something. We did, at our house, when we did that mound, we showed in the picture, we used sandy loam, which is sometimes called fill sand. It's about 85%, 85% sand, the rest of it is silt and clay. We made a hill 18 inches high. We didn't plant avocados on it for several years, we just had it there. And the rain and the irrigation water did not move it at all. So it's really hard for water to move sand. It's like on a beach. You think the waves would move that beach all around, but it doesn't, because sand is heavy. It's really hard for water to move sand. So if you make a pile of sand, which the avocados love to grow in, or get sandy dirt, the sandy loam or fill dirt they call it, and when they fill a hole on a construction site, they use sandy loam or fill dirt, because they don't want clay in there, because clay just gets sloppy when it gets wet. But if it's mostly sand, and again, you can make it pure sand, it doesn't move.
So I can go ahead and cut the area where I think I'm gonna put it, and then loam or the fill sand, and then when it's time to transplant, just put the tree in.
Yeah, you can make the mound out of sandy loam, sand, put the tree right in the middle of that, it'll be fine. Then put mulch on top, water frequently. Yes.
So, because I'm gonna do this today, so when I'm gonna plant it into a 5-gallon container, do I cover the seed, or do you have to leave a portion of the seed exposed?
In nature, there's supposedly half the seeds out of the ground, although there's no rules with that.
What's your personal recommendation?
I usually leave the seed slightly exposed, but I don't worry if it's almost totally buried, although I don't want to see it totally buried. And a lot of times by this time the seed, sometimes they just fall apart, not there at all, not a big deal.
Question regarding pests and pollination. So one of my carmen tree is blooming right now, and I see a lot of ants climbing and just feeding off the nectar. But I also already see 10 baby avocados. So wondering if you haven't heard anything about ants being a pollinator, or if not, what's the could ants harm an avocado tree?
Well, generally we don't want to. The question was, do ants help or hurt? Generally, we don't want ants around because they always do mischief. The only ants that probably don't do mischief are the native harvesters, but the little black ants and the big carpenter ants, their main job in nature is to, they're a rancher for aphids, mealybugs, whitefly, and scale. So if you see ants on an avocado, well, you don't want ants in an orchard at all. At least if they're black, because they farm sucking bugs. Because the sucking bugs suck on the tree, get some protein out of the sap, they excrete excess sugar, and that's the ants' food. So the ants move them around to the best parts of the plant to suck on, and they cause a lot of trouble that way. So you don't want the ants up there. Ants probably can do some pollination, but of course bees are especially modified for that. They have the fuzzy parts to collect the pollen. Whereas ants, I don't know if, they might eat the pollen. The pollen's totally nutritious. But I haven't read enough about ants pollination. Bees can do it. There's all different kinds of bees. The honeybees that we use for pollinating these aren't native to America at all. So apparently in Central America, there's a different bee doing the pollination. I don't know which bee it is.
If you sprayed the tree with honey water, wouldn't that encourage the ants?
It may, so you do have to control ants.
Relate to ants, I've heard you recommending andros, right?
Excuse me.
Yeah, the ant baits we like the best, that seem to work faster and more thoroughly, are like Amdro. There's 3 or 4 on the market that are like Amdro. They're cornmeal as the base that the ants want to eat. They have vegetable in them too. So the ants want that to feed on. But they have a low dosage of a slow-acting poison on them, so the ants will take it back, they can eat it, won't kill them right away, they can take it back to the nest, feed the whole colony, and then 3 or 4 days later, they're all dead. Versus other poisons that are contact poisons, you know, most pest controls use contact, so you don't see ants for a week or so, and then they're back. But the Amdro can wipe out the colony quite well. I mean, we used it at our house in 1990 when that product first came to California, and we used it for a year, and then didn't see an ant, and our neighbors didn't see an ant for like 15 years.
Is it safe to use it around fruit trees?
Well, you don't want to use it on the edible parts of the plant. So it's not for use on edibles, but you can certainly use it around them, or like in, you know, in the case of Amdro, they'll find it if you put it in the street. So you can, you know, put it in the green belt, you can put it in your neighbor's yard, you can put it on your lawn, you can put it anywhere you want, the ants will find it.
What's it called again?
Amdro, I have it on the shelf in the back of the store, AMDRO. I mean, there's other brands, I'm not gonna say that's the only brand. Other brands use different poisons, but they're all slow working, so they'll give the ants a chance to contaminate their nests and kill the whole
It'll
nest.
be moderately safe if I say put the baits 10 feet away from the avocado tree and let the ants take it back to their.
Yeah, it's not there's not many systemic poisons that are sold that the tree will actually absorb. I mean, avocado orchards and citrus orchards, all the orchards, they have to do a lot of ant control because the ants cause havoc. So they're always spraying ant control, mostly, you know, on the soil. And the rules in orchards are, if food hits the ground, you can't sell it. Because they're contact poisons, they're not systemic, they're contact poisons. So that's the rules we've seen, and what the literature says, use all these ant controls and things. You don't let the fruit, you don't sell fruit that touches the ground. So.
I have another question. What's the rooting for the avocado trees that they grow wild, the roots? I have an oak tree, and I'm having problems with it. I have to take it out because the roots are so big and they grow everywhere.
Well, any tree, if it's old enough, usually a tree has to be around 20 years old to start causing root problems.
Mine's just 20.
Right. So, but if you keep it small, it can't support a big root system, but if you let it grow 20, 30 foot, it's gonna have big roots. No
Well,
matter.
it kind of topped down last year, so I don't know if it's still gonna do it. We're hoping that it doesn't, but it's 20 years old.
Yeah. So it's hard. I mean, you could, okay, one rule on trees in the landscape is that if, say your trunk is 1 foot in diameter, they say you can cut off all the roots on that tree 3 trunk diameters away. So if you have a 1 foot diameter trunk, you can go out 3 foot and cut off all the roots, and you won't kill it. Now the tree may not like that at all, but that's what they found. That so when you see those big trees being moved in boxes down the streets, that's why the box is that size. It's 3 times the trunk diameter. They have to save 3 times the diameter of the trunk of all the roots, and then they can just take the tree right out of the ground and move it away and put it somewhere else. Even though that's only maybe 10% of the root system, apparently the tree can make it with that much root. Yes.
You said earlier that on the full-grown avocado that the roots only go about 1 foot deep. Is that the taproot or is that the?
No such thing as taproots in nature. So the U.S. Forest Department spend decades pulling trees out of the ground. The only time, I mean, you know, in a tall container, you'll find a taproot because it's a tall container and they're going right for those air holes at the bottom of the pot. But in the ground, there's no such thing. I mean, you know, if you have really good deep soil, like a lot of farms, sandy soil, 2 foot, 3 foot, 5 foot deep, the roots will go straight down because they can breathe that deep. But if the air runs out, they're sideways. So they, you know, the Forest Department said back in the 80s, the average, you get the most roots between 6 inches and 1 foot deep. 60% of the roots are in that first foot of soil, and 30% more of the roots are in the next foot of soil, and that's it. And I've dug trees out of the ground with trunks this big, didn't find a root below 18 inches. And it was only one right in the middle probably in the original box that they planted, and then that's it. All the rest roots, big roots, that deep in the ground. They weren't showing on the top of the ground, but they were only this deep and they were that big. And they do say that trees grow roots between 3 and 20 times wider than the tree is tall. So that tree I dug out, I remember I dug it out. It was a 20-year-old tree because the house was 20 years old. It had 100-foot long roots.
Oh, that's, wow.
That's,
We spray our holiday with honey water, but it only seems to attract flies. The honeybees just go to our one little citrus tree. Will the flies help pollinate at all, or?
maybe slightly, but they're not built to do it.
Yeah.
Like a honeybee collects the pollen and it sticks to its entire body, so it really helps.
We get avocados, so.
Yes.
If we wait, to 3 to 4 months until we plant it into the ground, and it would be around June, July, is that a problem because it's that hot at that time? Should we be waiting till closer to fall and it's okay?
No, avocados like it hot.
Okay.
They
And
like
then-
it. I mean, that summer it was 100 degrees every day. We saw the best growth on that. They just don't like it above 110. So unless it's an extreme heat wave, which we don't expect this year, then you should get any time.
And is a dripper system enough? Can you use a dripper system and provide enough water?
They're going away from drippers in orchards to micro sprinklers. They're trying to cover more area than the dripper, but if you have enough drippers on it, drippers probably fine for the first half a year. And then the second year, maybe 3 or 4 drippers, and the third year, maybe 5 or 10 drippers. You have to follow the root system out. So like in the orchard I am at, they have one micro sprinkler underneath each tree, covering, just about the drip line of the tree, the whole 15-foot across or so.
And can you trim too much that it will stunt the growth or stop
Oh, yeah.
production?
Yeah, I mean, these are solar panels, so we take one solar panel off the plant, it's a lot of its energy, so.
So is there like a percentage, don't go beyond a certain amount when you do trim annually?
Try not to trim anything off.
But if we trim it annually to try to keep the size, do we just try to be careful not to trim too much?
Right. Well, any branch you trim won't bloom that year. Any branch you don't touch the end of will bloom. So that, you just have to say, okay, I don't, these things that are 10 foot tall, I can't reach the fruit there anyway, so I'm just gonna cut them off. The branches down here, don't touch the tips, they'll bloom. So, see how this is blooming all over, so I can cut off the top 2 foot of that, and you still got plenty of fruit down here. So they do say, if you're doing heavy pruning, do it in the winter. And most trees, fruit trees especially, are at full strength right in the middle of winter because they've stored up all the energy for next spring's bloom. Once they bloom out and put on their new set of leaves, that's the weakest point of that tree's yearly cycle. So don't prune them right after they put out the new leaves. Then they don't have enough strength to get going again.
Great. And I have one other question for you too. When we put it in the ground, do we just cover the roots and do we loosen the dirt around the roots when we take it out of the container to put it in the ground?
We don't, when you plant it, we don't want you to do any scoring or anything like that. There's no advantages to that.
Okay.
It's interesting, Sunset Magazine actually did a study on tomato plants back 20 years ago, 30 years ago. They said, we wanted to see what the best method for planting tomatoes was. To score the root ball, do you plant it deeper? They said their best result was just butterflying the bottom of the root ball out to the sides to get the roots closer to the surface of the soil, which of course gives them more oxygen. And that was the only thing that made any difference at all. And planting them deeper didn't really make them grow faster. Scoring the root ball didn't make them grow faster. Of course, that does damage roots when you score them. When you try to pull the roots apart, that'll damage them. So apparently, you know, we just don't say don't do anything. This root system is totally within a foot of the surface, so unless you have real bad clay, just leave this alone. If you had real bad clay, then you might want to surround this with, well, this stuff breathes so well, you don't have to really modify it at all. If it wasn't this good a soil in here, you might put real sand around that just to get the air down to the roots, to keep those roots alive so you don't lose them. 'Cause that's the danger, you know, if this was in a bigger container like a box, the problem with the box, those roots are too deep. They're like 20 inches down and they can't breathe that deep, so you do have to, now again, our potting soil that's in that box is so airy that they may not have, this tree may not have a problem. But you can put air pipes around it to get air down there. You can put a lot of sand around. A lot of the big landscapers, when they plant the big tree boxes, they always put sand, backfill with sand, because that is a major problem on other plants that are grown in compost. You put them in the ground, you lose the roots because they can't get any air down there.
And as far as the sand that goes over the roots, just so it's over the roots, or do you think like, you know, a couple inches over the roots? Is there any rule of thumb for that, for when we put this, put it in the ground with the sand?
Well, you can bury roots pretty deep in sand, air can get through it for a while.
Okay.
So, but I wouldn't go, you know, don't go too extreme, but a few inches of sand over a root system, air gets through there.
Okay.
So if you have clay soil, would then that be a time to do deep watering as opposed to where you were saying earlier?
No, my friend's orchard is solid clay and they water daily. And again, they didn't, UC Davis did not find any advantages to deep and frequent watering over daily irrigation. No disadvantages. Deeper roots were on daily irrigation, less water usage, daily irrigation, better plant health, daily, you know, you want to keep, the tree wants to be near a riverbed, so it has a constant source of moisture, and that cycle of you know, too much water, too dry, too much water, flood irrigation is bad for the plant's health and operations. It's like you getting one drink a day instead of several drinks a day. Same for the plant, it'd rather have a constant source of water. I mean, there's some farms that water 18 times a day, and they said they save way much on their water bill. There is a vineyard in the Central Valley that says they watered 18 times a day by computer, in computer analysis. They want to water every hour, the temperature's above 80 to replace the water that the plant used in effort to keep the watering to a minimum. So more frequent irrigation is less water needed, which seems counterintuitive, but that's what the research shows. They said topping off the tank is how would you treat all your production plants. You top off the tank. Because in the old days, they used to let the tank run dry before the first irrigation. They said that was devastating to that crop. You know, after the rains were over, they'd wait for the ground to dry out before they would start irrigating. They said that was a mistake. As soon as the rain stops, start irrigating. And they said the crops turned out much better. It only cost them one extra irrigation.
And what was the study?
This is all UC Davis stuff. Stuff I read back in the 90s. I used to get their monthly journal. You know, they just talk about human resources nowadays. They don't have much, as much agricultural research as they used to. It's all, how do you treat your community? How do you feed your community? So it's different research nowadays. But yeah, if you go through the archives, I can't remember what it was called. It was California Grower was the name of the journal. And if you go back through the archives, you'll probably find those articles. They did some good research. And they still, UC, go look at the UC website, there's still big research being done. Okay, thank you very much.